Hi, I'm Shannon Simons. I am the author of Safe House, and I've been reading a chapter and then talking a little bit about what inspired the book to people who might have family or friends who experience domestic violence. So this is Safe House, and we're at chapter 7. In chapter 7, we've met Emily, and we've met Kelly, and we've met Grace, the people that work with them, and we get to take a little bit of look at normal life. So chapter 7, Mechanicum. Emily felt like her head hadn't been on the pillow for more than a second when she heard the rustling sound outside her window. Checking the clock, she realized it was morning already. "He's back," she whispered to herself. Her heart pumped with the usual adrenaline. He was going to be angry this time. She knew she couldn't call for help or wouldn't call for help. It would have made things worse if she'd gone to a hotel like that woman Grace wanted. Shaking, she went to the window and opened it. Burke was hanging inside the branches of the pine tree growing next to the second-story window. Perched on the branch, he let go of the tree and caught the windowsill, pulled his muscular body over the frame, and dropped into the room. Rising, he stood a full half a foot taller than she did. "I didn't say a thing, honey," she insisted. His arm shot out and he took her by the throat, his face never changing expression. He smelled of sweat, dirt, and the outdoors, and he had small bloody scratches covering his cheeks. Sticks and dried leaves were woven in his coarse hair. His Carhartt pants had dried mud on them, and his flannel shirt had a cut by his logger suspenders. His breathing never changed. He looked directly into her eyes, his eyes narrowing. No light, empty, lifeless eyes, flat like black holes, she thought. Then he began to squeeze. Tiny points of light flashed in her eyes. She clawed at his hands. He was squeezing hard enough that she couldn't breathe. Her vision began closing, going black. Air. She had to have air. Frantic, she could hear her own pulse slow as he closed off her arteries. I'm sorry, she mouthed, but nothing was coming out. He threw her back, releasing her throat. She landed halfway on the bed and slid to the floor, coughing, hands shaking, feeling her neck while she gasped for air and felt her blood begin pumping again. "Where is she?" he asked. Knowing he was asking about Amber, she kept her head down. Amber had called the police and betrayed them. "She's gone to school early," she lied, without making eye contact. Stomping out of the room, he went to Amber's room. Emily was still mad at Amber for calling the police and making their lives even worse than they already were. She had ruined everything, but that didn't mean Emily wanted Amber to get hurt. Running after him, she tried to get between him and the door to Amber's room. He kicked the door open. A cold breeze fluttered through the eyelet curtains hanging over the open window. So, next section. We're at the Cove, by the way. This is where part of the story takes place, and there are surfers out, even though it's like 60 degrees in July. So, next section. Amber let her car roll silently down the hill. The classic Bug was light and easily picked up speed. She popped the clutch and started it 2 blocks away from the intersection. Seeing the officer parked across the street from the house watch her leave, she wondered what he thought. Would her sister be okay? Mom was too busy with Burke to take care of them. Ever since she was old enough to hate him more than she loved him, she called Burke by his first name, knowing it annoyed her mother. She pictured 7-year-old Greta lying silently in her bed with that blank look on her face. Her mousy brown hair spread on her pillow looked thin and dry, unlike anyone else's in the family. The strands looked like withered brown leaves ready to blow away in the wind. Why did her father hate Greta so much? Little 9-month-old Bjorn still cried, but it was a fruitless endeavor when Burke was home. Bjorn and Greta were both so thin it infuriated Amber. She had to make sure they ate. Mom was just too busy keeping Burke happy. Someone had to do it. What would happen if she left for real? She decided to take the scenic route through town. Arriving this early at school would make her look even geekier than she already did. The houses gradually gave way to the quaint nautical downtown shops which lined Broadway and Main Street and all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Her mind turned to the ocean and its sound a rhythm that seemed to calm her like a drug. It was autumn. The tourists were gone home and kids were back in school. Driving over the ornate cement bridge that crossed the Mechanicum River, she slowed the VW Bug down and finally stopped. The sandy beach with its waving grass and rugged rocky cove was empty as far as she could see in either direction. It was almost like she and the seagulls were alone in the world. Letting the car idle, Amber rolled down her window, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath of fresh sea air. Loving the brisk saltwater smell of fish, sand, and aging wood, she listened to the rhythm of the ocean until someone behind her honked. She jumped, looking in the rearview mirror, and saw the city truck. She was stopping traffic. Sighing, she put her car in gear and gave in to the day that was upon her. And then a little break. Amber's car was the only one in the Nicanicum High School parking lot. She looked in the rearview mirror and tried to comb her greasy hair. No chance for a shower today. Someone was going to notice she was wearing the same clothes she had on yesterday. Man, she stunk. Luckily, her school bag was still in the car. Pulling her book bag into the front seat, she tried to finish her math assignment before class started. Then there's another break, and we go back to Kelly's house. Kelly made Sam breakfast, packed his lunch, and kissed him goodbye as if nothing had happened the night before. She hadn't given it much thought. When she heard his car drive away, she realized she hadn't even been breathing. She took a deep breath and let it out long and slow and felt her bruised head. She looked around the immaculate kitchen. She really loved it. She knew she needed to leave him and her beautiful home, but wished she could take the gorgeous woodwork, granite countertops, carved island, and antique furniture with her. Sam was a lot of things, including a great carpenter and a contractor. He was brilliant with wood. The floors shone. The pickled beadboard was perfect. Everything looked like a professional decorator had been hard at work. She found herself scanning for dust, looking for things she knew would set Sam off. She went to the bedroom and crawled on the floor. There was a dime under his dresser. Going to the laundry room, she checked the dryer and found a few more pieces of change. Taking the money she found last night from underneath the plastic lining of the drawer where she kept the tinfoil, she slipped it into her flip-flops, set out the back door, crossed the lawn to her garden. Moving the pumpkin by the big rock, she dug up a jar and put the change in it. Along with the other money she had collected, she figured she was up to about $200. It would take much more for bus tickets if that was the way she decided to go. So in chapter 7, we get to see how people live day to day when they're surviving domestic violence. In the first part, you saw Burke come back. So outside, the police were parked. The police had left. They'd been searching for him. I can't count the number of times I've had police officers, pastors, counselors, different people tell me, well, we told them to stay away, and so everything's going to be okay. I'm going to try to use neutral pronouns, but I know I fall into he and she because the bulk of the survivors that I worked with were women. That doesn't mean that women are the only people that are abused. It just crosses all genders. So, but here's what we know. What we know is that abuse is really often about power and control, most often, and that you can tell somebody to go away. You can have restraining orders. Police officers can tell you to stay away for the rest of the night. But in all of my years of experience, they always come back. They call, they manipulate. They're not going to give up control, not voluntarily. And then you may be listening and thinking, why doesn't she just leave? $200, that's a lot of money. That's gas enough. Get in the car, go. Trust grace, go somewhere. Well, I once heard a really great trainer, Ann O'Dell, say, don't tell survivors what to do, because once you do, you need to be willing to take them home, pay their bills, and suffer the consequences. I really want you to think about, why doesn't Kelly just leave? And why doesn't Emily just leave? And I'm going to answer that question for you by the end of the book about what is at stake. What could happen if they just leave? You can also see that normal life goes on. Kids go to school. So if you're a teacher, how do you know? How do you know what's going on in the kids' lives that you're working with? You know, Amber had some signs and symptoms. She hadn't been able to shower. She hadn't been able to get home. She probably looked tired. But the truth is it is really hard to see. It's probably easiest to see in the parents that you're working with, maybe even in the kids. The kids are trained and potentially, if there's been a lot of abuse over a long period of time, desensitized to abuse. I know for me, one time I was working for Head Start and I saw a little girl in the playroom and she's like, I told you get to bed. And she just acted out the whole abusive situation right there in the playhouse with the doll. And then I knew what was happening and could begin to try to provide some supports for the person that was the survivor. Sometimes with kids, You'll have parents that are very controlling, or you'll see like one parent has to ask the other parent for permission. So look for those little signs and symptoms of power and control. Responses maybe during parent-teacher conferences that seem just a little bit off. And the truth is that here's the hard thing. Survivors often discipline their children more harshly than they normally would in an effort to keep the peace and to keep the abuser from doing it. So it may look like the victim is the perpetrator. It may look like the person that you're working with, now she's mean and nasty to those kids, she's so hard on them, she won't let them do anything. But the truth is that they may be trying to keep the peace because it's better if I spank them, it's better if I'm counting to 3, it's better if I'm keeping everything perfect than I let the abuser step in because he's going to hurt them. And there are times when abusers will hurt children as a threat. And so the abuse may not even be occurring to the victim. The abuser may be abusing the children to keep the victim in line. And so you look for things like bilateral bruising, unusual bruises, stories that don't match, failure to thrive, which is what you're seeing in Greta in this story. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was Kelly's house. You may think I'm only writing about white wealthy women. Well, I haven't really said who Kelly or what they look like because I want you to see in your own mind's eye who you think about and who's on your mind at this time. But the truth is that it crosses all incomes. It crosses. Abusers can be police officers as easily as they can be pastors, as easily as they can be teachers, as easily as they can be unemployed and living off of the survivor's income, which is something I saw often. But what I saw more often than mess and more often than dirt was survivors going to great lengths to keep the peace. Oftentimes, power and control displayed itself in terms of survivors not having access to vehicles, not having access to dependable vehicles. And so you see Kelly is hoarding change. She's looking for a way to get out of town. She's thinking about taking a bus. It doesn't sound like she has access to a car. And it sounds like he has money, so it's not like she couldn't have access to a car. And if you're her neighbor, then that's kind of a little symptom. Kelly, why don't you have a car? Why aren't you driving? But be careful. Be careful that you don't get into the middle of something that gets you hurt as well. So that's chapter 7 at the Cove. And we're going to stay here to read tomorrow because I just got back from town. It is the week after July 4th. And as you can well imagine, it's a little nutty here. But this is the Cove.